The morning sun had barely risen over the military base when Captain Maya Rodriguez received the emergency call. She was in the middle of her daily equipment check, running her hands over the controls of her combat helicopter. The phone rang 3 times before she picked it up. The voice on the other end was urgent and shaking. A remote village near the border had been attacked. Militants had stormed through the small town at dawn, going house to house. They dragged families from their beds, separated children from parents, and rounded up everyone they could find. By the time the local authorities realized what was happening, it was too late. 200 innocent people were now prisoners, held in an old factory complex on the edge of the village. Maya stood frozen for a moment, processing the information. 200 lives hanging in the balance. She had flown dozens of missions before, rescued soldiers from behind enemy lines, and faced gunfire more times than she could count. But this was different. These were not soldiers. These were ordinary people who woke up thinking it would be just another normal day. The briefing room filled quickly. Officers rushed in, some still buttoning their uniforms. The base commander stood at the front, his face grave. A large map of the region was spread across the table. Red marks indicated the factory where the hostages were being held. Intelligence reports were scattered everywhere, some still warm from the printer. The situation was worse than anyone initially thought. The militant group holding the hostages was well armed and organized. They had set up defensive positions around the factory, placed lookouts on the roof, and blocked all the main roads leading to the compound. Satellite images showed armed men patrolling the perimeter. The militants had made their demands clear through a radio transmission: release their captured leader, or the hostages would be executed one by one. Several senior officers proposed waiting. They wanted to negotiate, to buy time, to think of a safer approach. The government could make deals, they argued. Perhaps money could solve this. Maybe if they waited long enough, the militants would make a mistake. But Maya knew better. She had studied these groups for years. They rarely kept their promises. History had shown that waiting often meant death for the innocent. She stepped forward and cleared her throat. All eyes turned to her. Some of the older officers looked skeptical. Maya was only 32 years old, younger than most people in the room. She had fought hard to earn her place as a combat pilot, facing doubt and discrimination at every turn. Many still questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. But Maya had proven herself time and again in the sky. She pointed to the map and began explaining her plan. Her voice was steady and confident. The factory was surrounded by open ground, making a traditional ground assault nearly impossible. The militants would see troops coming from miles away. Any attempt to storm the building would result in a bloodbath. The hostages would be the first casualties. But there was another way. Maya proposed an aerial assault. Using helicopters, they could approach from an unexpected angle, flying low and fast. They could use the nearby hills as cover, staying off the radar until the last possible moment. A small team of elite soldiers could rappel down directly onto the factory roof, while gunships provided cover fire. The element of surprise would be their greatest weapon. The base commander rubbed his temples. The plan was risky, incredibly risky. If something went wrong, they could lose not only the hostages but also the rescue team. The political fallout would be enormous. His career would be over. But as he looked at the intelligence reports again, he realized they had no better options. Time was running out. One colonel stood up and challenged Maya directly. He questioned her experience, pointed out that she had never led a mission of this scale. He reminded everyone that the lives of 200 people would rest on her shoulders. Could she handle that pressure? Was she really the right person for this job? Maya met his gaze without flinching. She had faced this kind of doubt her entire career. She explained that she had flown more combat hours than most pilots in the room. She had navigated through worse conditions, had been shot at, had brought damaged helicopters back to base when others said it was impossible. She did not need to prove herself again, but she would, because innocent lives depended on it. The room fell silent. The base commander looked around at his officers, then back at Maya. He took a deep breath and made his decision. The mission was approved. Maya would lead the operation. They had less than 12 hours to prepare. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Maya assembled her team carefully. She needed pilots who could fly in difficult conditions, soldiers who could move fast and think on their feet. She chose people she had worked with before, people she trusted with her life. Every member of the team understood the stakes. They studied the satellite images until they had memorized every detail. The factory was 3 stories tall with a flat roof. There were 7 entry points, but only 2 that could be used without alerting the entire compound. The hostages were being held in the main assembly hall on the ground floor, a large space with limited exits. The militants had concentrated their forces there, making it both the most dangerous and most critical target. Maya worked with the ground team commander, a tough veteran named Marcus Stone. He had 20 years of experience in special operations. At first, he seemed reluctant to take orders from her. But as they planned together, going over every detail, he began to respect her tactical knowledge. She understood not just flying, but the bigger picture of military operations. They discussed timing. The assault would happen at dusk when the sun would be in the militants' eyes. The changing light would make it harder for the enemy to see the approaching helicopters. They would fly a specific route that took advantage of the terrain, using valleys and hills to stay hidden as long as possible. Weather reports showed clear skies, which was both good and bad. Good because flying would be easier, bad because there would be no clouds for cover. Maya calculated fuel loads, ammunition requirements, and medical supplies. Every pound mattered. The helicopters would be flying at their maximum capacity. She also thought about the hostages. After 12 hours in captivity, they would be terrified, exhausted, and possibly injured. Some might panic during the rescue, running in wrong directions or freezing in fear. The team needed to be prepared for chaos. Marcus assigned specific soldiers to handle crowd control, to guide the hostages to safety once the militants were neutralized. As the afternoon wore on, Maya found herself alone for a moment. She stood outside the hangar, looking at the helicopters that would carry them into battle. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. 200 lives. If her calculations were wrong, if her plan had a flaw, people would die. Children would die. She thought about her own childhood, growing up in a small town not unlike the village that was now under siege. She remembered feeling safe, protected, never imagining that violence could shatter that peace. The hostages probably felt the same way yesterday. They went to sleep in their own beds, surrounded by family, believing tomorrow would be just like today. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her younger sister asking if she was okay. Maya had not told her family about this mission. They worried enough already every time she flew. She sent a quick reply saying everything was fine, that she would call soon. It was a small lie, but a necessary one. The base chaplain approached her, offering to talk if she needed it. Maya thanked him but declined. She had made her peace with the dangers of her job long ago. She believed in what she did, believed that some things were worth fighting for. Protecting innocent people was at the top of that list. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the team gathered for final preparations. They checked weapons, tested communication equipment, and reviewed the plan one last time. Maya walked among them, making eye contact with each person. She wanted them to see her confidence, to know that she believed in their success. The helicopters started their engines, the sound building to a deafening roar. Maya climbed into the lead aircraft, settling into the pilot's seat that had become like a second home to her. She ran through her pre-flight checklist automatically, her hands moving with practiced precision over the controls. Marcus and his team boarded the other helicopters, their faces painted with camouflage, their gear checked and rechecked. These were professionals, the best of the best, but Maya could see the tension in their movements. They all knew what was at stake. The base commander's voice came through her headset one last time. He wished them luck, told them that the entire nation was counting on them. Maya acknowledged the transmission, then switched to the team channel. She gave the order to take off. The helicopters lifted into the air, their rotors slicing through the evening sky. As they climbed higher, the base grew smaller beneath them. Maya took one last look back, then turned her focus forward. There was no room for doubt now, no time for second thoughts. They flew in tight formation, staying low as they headed toward the target zone. The landscape rolled beneath them, peaceful and quiet. Farmers were bringing their livestock in for the night. Families were probably sitting down to dinner. None of them knew that a desperate rescue mission was underway just miles away. Maya's hands were steady on the controls, but her mind raced through the plan again and again. She visualized every move, every possible complication. She thought about the hostages, imagined their fear, their hope that someone would come for them. She would not let them down. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Maya checked her instruments, confirmed their position. They were 20 minutes from the target. She ordered the team to prepare for combat. Inside the factory, the hostages huddled together in the darkness. They did not know that help was coming, that a woman who had spent her life preparing for this moment was racing toward them through the fading light. All they could do was pray and hope that somehow, some way, they would survive this nightmare. The militants were confident. They had fortified their position, established their demands, and believed the government would eventually give in. They did not expect an attack, especially not from the air. That overconfidence would be their downfall. Maya spoke quietly into her microphone, giving her team updates on their progress. Her voice was calm, professional, revealing none of the adrenaline pumping through her veins. This was it. Years of training, countless hours of practice, all leading to this one critical moment. The factory came into view in the distance, a dark shape against the evening landscape. Maya's grip tightened on the controls. She thought one more time about all the people depending on her, then pushed the thought aside. There was only the mission now, only the next few crucial minutes that would determine everything. The helicopters dropped even lower, skimming just above the treetops. Maya felt the aircraft respond to every tiny movement of her hands. The vibration of the rotors hummed through her entire body. Through her headset, she could hear the breathing of her team members, the occasional click of weapons being readied, the tension that filled every moment of silence. They were 5 minutes out now. The factory loomed larger with each passing second. Maya could see the armed guards on the roof through her targeting system. They were relaxed, not expecting any trouble. One was smoking a cigarette, another was laughing at something on his phone. Their weapons were slung casually over their shoulders. She gave the signal. The formation split, each helicopter moving to its designated position. Maya's aircraft would make the first approach, drawing attention and fire if necessary. The other helicopters would use that distraction to position Marcus and his team for the rooftop insertion. Timing was everything. If they arrived even 30 seconds too early or too late, the entire plan could collapse. The factory guards finally noticed something. One of them pointed at the sky, his body language changing from casual to alert. He grabbed his radio, shouting warnings to his companions. But it was too late. Maya pushed the helicopter forward at maximum speed, closing the distance faster than they could react. Gunfire erupted from the ground. Tracer rounds lit up the darkening sky, streaking past Maya's helicopter. She banked hard left, the aircraft responding instantly to her commands. The bullets missed by mere feet. Her door gunner returned fire, the heavy machine gun thundering in short, controlled bursts. 2 of the rooftop guards went down immediately. The other helicopters swept in from different angles. Marcus and his team were already standing in the open doors, ropes in hand, ready to descend. The moment their helicopter reached position, they dropped like stones, sliding down the ropes with practiced speed. Within seconds, all 12 special operators were on the roof, weapons up, moving toward the access door. Maya circled the building, providing cover fire. Her door gunners targeted any militant who appeared with a weapon. The noise was overwhelming, the chaos intense. But inside the chaos, there was order. Every member of her team knew exactly what they were supposed to do. Down below, inside the factory, the hostages heard the explosions and gunfire. Panic swept through the assembly hall. Children screamed. Adults tried to shield them with their own bodies. The militants guarding them looked up at the ceiling nervously, trying to understand what was happening. Some of them ran toward the exits, abandoning their posts. Others grabbed hostages, using them as human shields. Marcus and his team breached the roof access door with a small explosive charge. The metal door blew inward, and they poured through the opening into the stairwell. The interior was dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in a dim red glow. They moved down the stairs in practiced formation, weapons sweeping every corner. On the second floor, they encountered their first serious resistance. 3 militants opened fire from behind a makeshift barricade. Bullets ricocheted off metal beams and concrete walls. Marcus's team took cover, returning fire with precise shots. 1 militant fell, then another. The third tried to retreat but was cut down before he could reach the door. Maya monitored the assault through her headset, listening to Marcus's terse commands and the team's responses. She could hear the gunfight, could picture exactly what was happening inside. Her role now was to make sure no reinforcements arrived, to keep the perimeter secure. 2 more vehicles were approaching from the main road, probably militants coming to help their comrades. She directed one of the gunships to intercept. The helicopter swooped down, its weapon systems locking onto the vehicles. A burst of cannon fire tore into the lead truck, which swerved off the road and crashed into a ditch. The second vehicle stopped immediately, its occupants scrambling out and running into the nearby fields. They wanted no part of this fight anymore. Inside the factory, Marcus reached the first floor. The main assembly hall was just ahead, through a set of double doors. He could hear voices inside, the crying of children, the shouted commands of the militants. He positioned his team, 3 men on each side of the door. They had practiced this breach 100 times in training, but never with real hostages, never with so much at stake. He counted down silently with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. The doors burst open, and flash grenades flew into the room. The blinding light and deafening bang momentarily stunned everyone inside. Marcus's team rushed in, their training taking over completely. They had to distinguish between hostages and militants in split seconds, had to make life-or-death decisions faster than thought. The militants, who had been using hostages as shields, found themselves targets. The special operators were too skilled, too precise. They took shots that seemed impossible, threading bullets between innocent people to hit their captors. Some militants tried to fight back, but they were outmatched. Within 60 seconds, the main militant force inside the hall was neutralized. But the situation was still dangerous. The hostages were in shock, some frozen in place, others trying to run in all directions. Marcus and his team had to take control quickly before someone got hurt in the confusion. They shouted instructions, trying to be heard over the crying and screaming. Slowly, order began to emerge from the chaos. Maya received Marcus's transmission. The assembly hall was secure. The hostages were safe. But they still had to get everyone out of the building. There could be more militants hiding elsewhere in the factory, or reinforcements could arrive at any moment. The mission was far from over. She coordinated the evacuation. 2 helicopters landed in the open ground behind the factory, their rotors still turning, ready for a quick getaway if needed. Medical personnel rushed out, prepared to treat the injured. Marcus's team began moving the hostages out in organized groups, prioritizing children and anyone who appeared hurt. An elderly woman collapsed as soon as she stepped outside. The medics rushed to her side, checking her vital signs. She was having a heart attack, probably brought on by the stress and fear of the last 12 hours. They worked frantically to stabilize her, administering medication and oxygen. Maya watched from above, feeling helpless. She had saved these people from the militants, but some battles could not be won with guns and helicopters. More hostages streamed out of the building. Maya counted them, matching the numbers against the intelligence report. 187, 190. Where were the others? Had some been moved to a different location? Were they hiding somewhere in the factory, too scared to come out? Marcus sent a team to sweep the building again, searching every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot. They found 5 hostages locked in a storage room on the 3rd floor. A young mother and her 3 children, plus an elderly man who could barely walk. They had been separated from the main group, probably because they had caused some trouble or the militants wanted extra insurance. Maya felt a wave of relief as those final 5 were brought out. 200 hostages, all accounted for. Against all odds, the impossible had been achieved. But she kept her emotions in check. They still had to get everyone safely away from this place. Suddenly, one of her gunners shouted a warning. Movement in the tree line to the north. More militants were approaching, at least 20 of them, heavily armed. They must have been stationed elsewhere and were now responding to the attack. Maya's helicopter swung around to face them, weapons ready. The militants opened fire from the cover of the trees. Bullets struck the helicopter's armored plating with loud metallic pings. Maya returned fire, her gunners unleashing everything they had. Trees splintered under the barrage, but the militants were well-positioned and determined. On the ground, Marcus realized they needed to evacuate faster. The transport helicopters were loaded to capacity, but there were still dozens of hostages waiting. He made the difficult decision to start sending them out, even though it meant leaving himself and his team exposed until the helicopters could return for a second trip. The first transport lifted off, carrying 50 hostages to safety. Children pressed their faces against the windows, watching the factory and the gunfight recede beneath them. The pilot pushed the aircraft hard, wanting to get these innocent people as far from danger as possible. Maya provided covering fire as the second transport loaded. The incoming militants were getting bolder, moving closer, trying to prevent the evacuation. She knew her ammunition was running low. She had to make every shot count. Her gunners worked methodically, targeting anyone who presented a clear threat. Then her worst fear materialized. One of the militants had a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. She saw him step out from behind a building, the weapon on his shoulder, aiming at the grounded transport helicopter. If that rocket hit, 50 people would die instantly. Maya did not hesitate. She threw her helicopter directly into the line of fire, placing herself between the militant and the transport. It was a calculated risk, but there was no other choice. Her door gunner saw the threat at the same moment and opened fire. The bullets found their mark just as the militant pulled the trigger. The rocket launched, but the militant was already falling, his aim thrown off. The projectile streaked past Maya's helicopter, missing by less than 10 feet. It continued on into the open field beyond and exploded harmlessly. Maya's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady on the controls. The second transport helicopter lifted off successfully, carrying another group of hostages to safety. Only one more trip would be needed. Marcus and his team held their defensive positions around the remaining hostages, returning fire at the persistent militants. Ammunition was running low for everyone. They had to hold out just a little longer. The transport helicopter returned for its final run. This time, there was no careful loading process. Marcus literally pushed people aboard, packing them in as tightly as possible. The helicopter was designed for 30 passengers, but there were still 40 people on the ground, including his own team. They would have to make it work. As the last hostages boarded, Marcus and his team fell back, providing rear guard. They moved in pairs, one person covering while the other retreated, textbook military tactics executed under fire. Maya's helicopter continued to hammer the militant positions, giving them the precious seconds they needed. Marcus was the last man to board the overloaded helicopter. As he pulled himself up, a bullet struck the aircraft's fuel tank. The pilot immediately saw the gauge dropping, the red warning lights illuminating his instrument panel. They were losing fuel fast, too fast. They might not make it back to base. Maya heard the emergency transmission. Her mind raced through options. The transport helicopter was too heavy and now had a fuel leak. If they tried to fly the full distance back to base, they would crash somewhere over the countryside. But if they reduced weight, if some people transferred to other aircraft, they might have a chance. She ordered her own helicopter closer, despite the risk. Her aircraft was a gunship, not designed for carrying passengers, but they could squeeze a few people in. Marcus understood immediately. He selected 5 of his lightest team members, and they jumped across to Maya's helicopter, a dangerous transfer while both aircraft were hovering in the combat zone. With the reduced weight, the transport pilot recalculated. He could make it to a small airfield about 15 minutes away, but no further. It would have to be enough. He lifted off, the helicopter laboring under the load, fuel pouring out of the damaged tank in a fine mist. Maya's entire formation turned for home, leaving the factory behind. The militants fired a few final shots, but the helicopters were already out of effective range. The mission was complete. 200 hostages rescued, 0 casualties among the innocents. It seemed impossible, but they had done it. The flight back was tense. Everyone watched the fuel gauge on the damaged transport helicopter, watching the needle drop toward empty. The pilot was a skilled veteran, adjusting his speed and altitude to maximize fuel efficiency. He was flying on instinct and experience, coaxing every last mile out of his dying aircraft. The small airfield appeared in the distance. The transport helicopter was running on fumes now, the engine starting to sputter. Emergency crews on the ground were ready, having been alerted to the situation. The pilot lined up his approach, knowing he would only get one chance at this. The helicopter touched down hard, bouncing once before settling on the tarmac. The engine died the moment the skids made contact, the last drops of fuel consumed. The pilot sat back in his seat, his hands shaking slightly. They had made it. By seconds and inches, they had made it. The hostages poured out, some kissing the ground, others crying with relief. Medical teams rushed forward, triaging injuries and providing care. Most of the hostages were physically unharmed, though all would carry psychological scars from their ordeal. But they were alive. They would see their families again, watch their children grow up, live the lives that had almost been stolen from them. Maya landed her helicopter back at the main base, just as full darkness fell. Her hands were still wrapped around the controls, her body tense from hours of flying under combat conditions. As the engine wound down, she finally allowed herself to relax. Her shoulders dropped, her breathing slowed. They had done the impossible. Marcus approached her as she climbed out of the aircraft. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, his uniform torn in several places. He extended his hand, and when Maya took it, he pulled her into a brief hug. No words were necessary. They both understood what they had accomplished together and what it had cost in terms of stress and risk. The base erupted in celebration. News of the successful rescue had spread quickly. Soldiers who had no connection to the mission came out to cheer and congratulate the team. The base commander stood watching from his office window, a rare smile on his weathered face. He had trusted Maya when others doubted her, and she had proven him right in the most dramatic way possible. But Maya did not feel like celebrating yet. She walked to the medical tent, where the rescued hostages were being treated. She wanted to see them with her own eyes, to confirm that they were truly safe. Inside, doctors and nurses moved between cots, checking vital signs, treating minor injuries, offering comfort and water. A small girl, no more than 7 years old, sat on one of the cots. Her face was dirty, her clothes torn, but her eyes were bright. She was clutching a stuffed animal that had somehow survived the ordeal with her. When she saw Maya in her flight suit, she pointed and said something to her mother. The woman looked up, saw Maya, and started crying. The woman stood and walked over. Through tears, she thanked Maya repeatedly. She said she had prayed for a miracle, had begged God to send someone to save her daughter. And here was that miracle, standing before her in the flesh. Maya felt her own eyes begin to water. She was not used to showing emotion, had trained herself to remain professional and detached. But this was different. More hostages approached, wanting to thank the pilot who had led their rescue. An elderly man shook her hand with both of his grip surprisingly strong. A teenage boy asked if he could take a photo with her. A mother held up her infant son, saying she wanted him to meet the woman who had saved his life, even though he was too young to understand or remember. Maya spent nearly an hour in the medical tent, talking with survivors, listening to their stories of fear and hope. They told her about the moment they heard the helicopters, how some thought it was their imagination at first. They described the terror of the gunfight, the confusion, and then the overwhelming relief when soldiers appeared and told them they were safe. One man, a schoolteacher named David, had tried to keep the children calm during their captivity. He had told them stories, led them in quiet songs, anything to distract them from their fear. He had bruises on his face where the militants had beaten him for being too loud, but he said it was worth it because the children needed someone to be brave for them when they could not be brave themselves. As Maya finally left the medical tent, a reporter approached her. The news media had gotten word of the rescue and were desperate for details. The reporter thrust a microphone in her face, asking how it felt to be a hero, whether she had been scared, what went through her mind during the assault. Maya politely declined to comment. This was not about her. It was about the hostages, about the team that worked together, about the lives that had been saved. The military would hold a proper press conference later, with carefully prepared statements and sanitized details. But for now, Maya just wanted quiet. She walked to the far edge of the base, away from the celebrations and attention, and stood looking up at the stars. The same stars that had watched over the factory, that had seen everything that happened. The same stars that would be shining tomorrow and the day after, long after the headlines faded. Marcus found her there an hour later. He brought 2 cups of coffee and handed her one without speaking. They stood side by side, drinking the bitter liquid, processing everything they had been through. Finally, Marcus spoke. He told Maya that in 20 years of special operations, he had never seen a pilot with her skill or courage. He said she had earned the respect of every soldier on that mission, and that respect was not given lightly. Maya thanked him, but pointed out that he and his team had done the hardest part. They were the ones who went into the building, who faced the militants at close range, who had to make split-second decisions about who to shoot and who to save. She had just flown the helicopter. Marcus laughed and said that she had done much more than just fly. She had led them, had kept them alive with her covering fire, had risked her own aircraft to save the transport helicopter. She was being too modest. The next morning, Maya was summoned to the base commander's office. She expected a debriefing, a routine after-action report. Instead, she found several high-ranking officers waiting for her, including a general she had only seen in photographs. They asked her to sit, and then they told her that her mission had become national news. The entire country was talking about the dramatic rescue, about the female pilot who had led it. The government wanted to award her a medal for valor. They wanted to use her story to inspire others, to show that dedication and skill knew no gender. But the general made it clear that the decision was hers. If she preferred to remain out of the spotlight, they would respect that. Some heroes wanted recognition, others wanted privacy. Both choices were honorable. Maya thought about it carefully. She had never sought attention or glory. She flew helicopters because she believed in protecting people, in serving something larger than herself. But she also understood the power of representation. There were young girls who dreamed of being pilots, who faced people telling them they could not, they should not. It was not a job for women. Maybe her story could help those girls believe in themselves. She agreed to accept the medal, but on one condition. The entire team had to be recognized, not just her. Marcus and his soldiers, the door gunners, the transport pilots, the medical personnel, everyone who had played a role in saving those 200 lives. The general smiled and agreed. It would be done. The medal ceremony took place 2 weeks later. Maya stood at attention in her dress uniform, feeling uncomfortable with all the cameras and attention. The president himself presented her with the Star of Valor, the nation's highest military honor for non-combat personnel. The citation read in part, "For extraordinary courage and exceptional leadership in the face of grave danger, resulting in the successful rescue of 200 hostages from terrorist captivity." But the moment that meant the most to Maya came after the official ceremony. The rescued hostages had been invited to attend, and many of them came. They formed a line, each one waiting to personally thank her again. The little girl with the stuffed animal gave Maya a drawing she had made, showing a helicopter with a woman pilot flying over a factory. It was crude and childlike, but Maya would treasure it more than any medal. David, the school teacher who had kept the children calm, told Maya that he had returned to his classroom. On the first day back, his students had asked him what happened, how he survived. He told them about the soldiers who came from the sky, about the pilot who flew through enemy fire to save them. His students asked if the pilot was like a superhero. David said no, superheroes were made up. This pilot was real, which made what she did even more impressive. As the months passed, Maya returned to regular duty. She flew routine missions, trained new pilots, and continued to serve. But her life had changed in ways she was still understanding. She received letters from young girls saying they wanted to be pilots now, that they had seen what Maya did, and it inspired them to pursue their dreams despite the obstacles. Schools invited her to speak. At first, she declined, uncomfortable with public speaking. But eventually, she accepted a few invitations. She talked about hard work, about never giving up, about pushing through doubt and discrimination. She told students that being a pilot required math and science, discipline and courage, but most of all, it required a commitment to something beyond yourself. One question came up repeatedly. Had she been afraid during the rescue mission? Maya always answered honestly. Yes, she had been afraid. Fear was natural, even necessary. It kept you alert, made you careful. The key was not to let fear control you, to acknowledge it, but not surrender to it. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear. Marcus stayed in touch with Maya. They had formed a bond that went beyond ordinary friendship. They had trusted each other with their lives, had worked together under the most intense pressure imaginable. He told her that several of his team members had requested to work with her again, if another difficult mission came up. They knew that with Maya flying above them, they had the best possible chance of success and survival. The militant group that had taken the hostages was scattered after the rescue. Some members were captured, others went into hiding. Intelligence reports suggested the group had been severely damaged by the loss of so many fighters and the failure of their operation. They had wanted to make a statement to show their power. Instead, they had demonstrated the opposite. Maya sometimes thought about the militants she had killed during the rescue. War was never simple, and taking a life, even in defense of innocence, left a mark. She had been trained to make those difficult decisions, to prioritize mission success and the safety of civilians over everything else. But training did not erase the human cost of violence. The reality that the militants she killed might have had families, might have been someone's son or brother. She talked about these feelings with a military counselor who helped her process the complex emotions that came with combat. The counselor reminded her that she had faced an impossible choice: act and risk casualties, or do nothing and guarantee that hostages would die. She had chosen to act, and because of that choice, 200 people went home to their families. That mattered. That would always matter. 1 year after the rescue, Maya was invited back to the village where the hostages had been held. The community wanted to honor her and her team with a memorial. She almost declined, thinking it would be too emotional, too difficult. But Marcus convinced her to go. The people needed closure, he said, and so did she. The factory had been demolished. In its place, the village had built a small park with a playground for children. A stone monument stood at the entrance, listing the names of all 200 people who had been rescued. At the top of the monument was a simple inscription: "On this site, courage defeated terror." The ceremony was simple and moving. The mayor spoke about how the village had recovered from their trauma, how the hostages had slowly rebuilt their lives. Some had moved away, unable to live in the place where they had suffered. But many had stayed, refusing to let the militants drive them from their homes. The village was healing, growing stronger in the broken places. When Maya was asked to speak, she kept her remarks brief. She thanked the community for their resilience, for not giving up hope. She said that the rescue mission succeeded because of many people working together, each doing their part. She was just one link in that chain, no more important than any other. The real heroes, she insisted, were the hostages themselves, who had endured captivity with dignity and courage. After the ceremony, Maya walked through the new park. Children were playing on the swings and slides, their laughter filling the air. It was hard to believe that just a year ago, this spot had been the scene of such violence and fear. But life had a way of reclaiming spaces, of turning darkness back into light. These children would grow up knowing the story of what happened here, but it would be history to them, not a present danger. The little girl who had given Maya the drawing recognized her and came running over. She was bigger now. Her face had lost some of its baby roundness. She hugged Maya's legs and chattered excitedly about school, about her friends, about the new bicycle her father had bought her. She was just a normal 7-year-old girl. worried about homework and playground games. That was exactly how it should be. Maya knelt down to the girl's level and talked with her for a few minutes. She asked about the stuffed animal, whether it was still doing okay. The girl said yes, it slept on her bed every night and kept the bad dreams away. Maya felt a lump in her throat. This was why she did what she did. So little girls could sleep safely, protected by a worn stuffed animal instead of armed soldiers. On the flight back to base, Maya looked out the window at the landscape passing below. She thought about all the people down there, living their ordinary lives, most of them safe and secure. They did not think about the military, about the pilots and soldiers who worked every day to maintain that safety. And that was fine. That was the goal, really. To protect people so well that they never had to think about being protected. She knew there would be other missions, other crises. The world was full of danger, full of people who wanted to hurt innocents for political or ideological reasons. Her work was far from over, but she also knew that she had proven something important, both to herself and to others. She had shown that when everything was on the line, when 200 lives hung in the balance, she could be counted on. She could lead. She could succeed. Maya thought about the young girls who had written to her, who looked up to her as a role model. She hoped she could live up to their expectations, could continue to show them that gender was not a barrier to achievement. But more than that, she hoped she could help them understand that being a hero was not about seeking glory or recognition. It was about being willing to serve, to sacrifice, to put others before yourself. The helicopter descended toward the base as the sun set behind them. Maya guided it down smoothly, her hands confident on the controls. Another day of service complete. Another small contribution to the safety and security of innocent people. It was not glamorous work most of the time. It was routine flights, maintenance checks, training exercises, and paperwork. But when the moment came, when people needed help desperately, she was ready. That readiness, that commitment to excellence, even in the mundane moments, was what made the difference between success and failure. Maya understood that now more than ever. The rescue mission had not been won in those intense few hours of combat. It had been won in the thousands of hours of training that came before, in the dedication to mastering her craft, in the refusal to accept anything less than her best effort. As she shut down the helicopter and filled out her post-flight checklist, Maya felt a quiet satisfaction. Not pride exactly, though she was proud of what her team had accomplished. It was more a sense of purpose fulfilled, of being in the right place at the right time with the right skills. She had been given a gift, the ability to fly these powerful machines, and she had used that gift in service of others. The base was quiet in the evening. Most personnel had finished their duties and returned to their quarters. Maya walked slowly across the tarmac, in no hurry to get anywhere. She thought about calling her family, updating them on her life. Her sister would want to know everything, would be excited and worried in equal measure. Her parents would tell her to be careful, to stay safe, the same thing they had been saying since she first joined the military. But tonight, Maya decided to keep the day's mission to herself for a little longer. The successful completion of a routine training flight, nothing special to report. Her family did not need to know about every patrol, every sortie. They worried enough already. She would tell them eventually, when the mission was declassified, when it became just another story from her service. For now, it was enough to know that somewhere out there, 200 people were sleeping in their own beds, safe with their families, because of what she and her team had done. Maya reached her quarters and paused at the door. She looked back at the flight line, at the rows of helicopters standing ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow, there would be new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. She was ready for all of it. She had been tested in the crucible of real combat and had not been found wanting. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same determination and skill. She went inside, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion that had been building throughout the day. As she lay down, her last thought before sleep took her was of the little girl's drawing, now framed and hanging on her wall. A simple picture of a helicopter and a pilot, drawn by a child who understood that sometimes heroes were real. And sometimes, they looked like ordinary people who did extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. Maya smiled and closed her eyes, already dreaming of tomorrow's flight.